evening and welcome to Sociology 102. Our presentation today will be on the topic of crime and COVID-19 in Trinidad and Tobago and the impact COVID-19 has had on crime in Trinidad and Tobago. This presentation was prepared by myself, Nadeem Mohammed, my colleagues Anaya Millet, Nikolai Rampasad, and Shaim Prosper. From the very start, we must identify from a sociological perspective what is crime. Crime is the breach of rules or laws for which some governing authority or body can ultimately prescribe a conviction. Sociology, a normative definition, views crime as deviant behavior that violates prevailing or existing norms or cultural standards prescribing how humans ought to behave normally. There have been many methods used for measuring crime in a country, such as household surveys, hospital or insurance records, compilations by the police, and similar law enforcement agencies. We must admit that some offenses are likely to go unreported to the police. And crime can be divided into two: violent crimes, which involves harm to another person, generally done intentionally. And the seriousness of this crime can be determined by the amount of harm, and the amount of harm can increase with the use of a weapon. A non-violent crime, however, involves the harm to property or possessions, such as fraud or certain drug charges and drug abuses. Provided on this slide is a presentation of the year 2019 and the year 2020 of a general illustration of the crime committed. The red bars indicate crime done in 2019, in the year 2019, and the blue bars are the year 2020. So across the crime spectrum, we see fraud offenses to robberies, murders, kidnappings. We can see that generally there is a decrease in crime when we compare the 2 years, 2019 to 2020. Thus far, as of April 2021, we can also see a decline in the crime rates. This is a recording of both violent and non-violent crimes. In this slide is just another way of graphing the crime rates. In the line graph, you can see that the crime is much lower in 2020 than in 2019. The blue line representing the year 2020. Investigating crime from a sociological perspective, we must take a look at the theory of deviance, which asks primarily the nature of the crime, who commits the crimes and why they do that, and how does society respond to criminal actions. One of the primary theories of deviance is the conflict theory, which basically states that people behave deviant in an attempt to change their unfortunate circumstances. So the way the conflict theory is presented by Mr. Karl Marx is a split in society, where basically the poor gets poorer and the rich get richer. And there isn't really much opportunity given by the rich to uplift the poor to come out of their unfortunate circumstances. So the conflict theory proposes that with poor economic conditions, it can lead to an increase in theft, robbery, larceny, drug trafficking, drug abuse, and other crimes as well. Sticking a pin in the conflict theory, let's take a look at the COVID-19 restrictions in Trinidad. For reduced operations and closure of businesses, many became unemployed, laid off, sent home. The lower income earners were mostly affected in these situations. Coming back to the conflict theory, we expected that there would have been an increase in robberies and burglaries. However, that did not take place. The opposite happened. Taking another look of the statistics compared from 2019 to 2020, which is the year of the lockdown, basically, you can see a significant drop in various crimes committed, such as kidnappings, robberies, break-ins, woundings, larceny, etc. So the question asks, so then what crime increased during this pandemic lockdown? So that brings us to domestic violence, an unintended impact of social distancing policies. Domestic violence is a pattern of behavior in any relationship that is used to gain or maintain power and control over an intimate partner. It can take the forms of physical abuse, sexual abuse, emotional or even economic abuse. Psychological actions or threats of actions that influence another person, such as fright, intimidation, terrorization, manipulation, hurt, humiliation, blame, injure, and harm. According to the Minister of Social Welfare, she reported that in 2019, there were 232 cases reported of domestic violence. However, in the year 2020, there was a report of 556 domestic violence cases. And in 2020, 46 women were killed, 21 of them in domestic violence situations, representing around 13% of homicides for the year 2020. So we ask ourselves, what happened? There were stay-at-home orders, increased unemployment. There was a lot of stress associated with childcare and homeschooling, as parents and children now have to do their work, their jobs, and their children have to do their schoolwork in the same environment. Increased financial security, unemployment had risen. Poor coping strategies, including the increase of alcohol and other substances. And naturally, in sociology literature, you would see that when families spend more time together, violence may occur without any specific reason. And this is a dynamic that can be attributed to human psychology. And with these stay-at-home restrictions, it didn't make it any easier for the children and the parents. Parents and children became confined to their homes. They were cut off from their friends, their classmates, their neighbors, their colleagues, and those capable of reporting signs of abuse and violence. Even places victims would go to get help and to escape violent situations, they were not able to visit these places and spend time away from their offenders. So linking COVID-19 and domestic violence increase in Trinidad and Tobago, we used the resource theory. The resource theory can be used to understand family violence. Theory basically states that individuals, they used the resources that are available to them, such as income, education, social skills, status, and prestige to achieve their goals. And it must be acknowledged that violence is also a resource that can be used to achieve personal interests and goals. And the more resources an individual has, the more power that person has available to them to call upon when needed. So the more resources that are available, the less likely the person will resort to using physical force and violence and abuse as a method of meeting his or her goals. So what happened in the pandemic lockdown? COVID-19 lockdown regulations took away resources from the people, one of them mainly being income. But 12,000 grants were distributed due to reduced incomes during the year 2020. What happened? Some of those people resorted to violence in the family because violence is also a resource they can use to achieve their goals. Slide, we can just see a couple news clippings of some of the violence that took place domestically. And we were also able to link this phenomenon with the feminist theory, especially in the rural areas and even in some main cultures in Trinidad, encourage a patriarchal environment. So where this environment exists and men brings home the income and are able to achieve that authority over their family, the COVID-19 restrictions put a peg in their necks. So what happens when that stops with unemployment? How now can they express their dominance without money? Abuse now becomes an option for them. And one of the most brutal and explicit expressions of patriarchal domination is abuse. And at the core of the feminist theory, sociologically, it is the idea that in most societies, women have been systematically oppressed and that men have been historically dominant. And this is referred to as patriarchy. In conclusion, we were able to outline the definition of crime and some methods used to measure it. We were able to identify the different types of crimes, violent versus non-violent. During this presentation also, we were able to unlink crime in Trinidad and Tobago, the increase, to the conflict theory. However, we realized that using this resource theory and the feminist theory, we were able to explain the spike in the domestic violence occurrence. And that brings us to the end of the presentation. We thank you very much for your time and patience, and we hope you found our presentation informative and enjoyed watching it. Thank you very much. There's a jungle out there and the hunt is on.